Hey developers, today I'm going to show you 6 examples of how to use JavaScript error handling in your applications. So we're going to look at promises, we're going to look at async await, we're going to look at Rxjs, and custom decorators. So if you don't know what the Rxjs is, don't worry, I'll explain it. But I'm going to cover a lot of different types of error handling, and so let's get into it. Hey, and if you don't know, my name is Erik. I'm a full stack software developer. I'm also the author of Vue.js in Action, which I will make sure I put a link in the bottom. And also, if you click on that link, you can get signed up to my mailing list, and I'll let you know when I have videos coming out, and also I do really cool giveaways, things like that, so make sure you check that out. In fact, if you listen all the way to the end, I might have something for you guys, so stay tuned. Okay, let's go ahead and start with promises and take a look at the error handling for that. So if you don't know what a promise is, I'll read the definition. Basically, it's an object that may produce a single value sometime in the future, either a resolved value or it might reject. So we use it commonly in many libraries that connect to do HTTP requests. Usually they have some kind of promise. There's a lot of different scenarios you might use them. We can go ahead and just create a fake one for now. So we'll call it my promise. And that's going to equal new promise. And then we usually have 2 things that go around with it. We have a resolve and a reject, like this. And by the way, I'm just using ES6 arrow functions to make things a little bit easier. And then inside there, I have a arrow function. And then from here, we can do something. So I'll go ahead and put a set timeout. And then inside the set timeout, we'll have another arrow function, which will then do something. So we'll have it resolve first. Resolved. It'll just return back a string. And then we'll put in a time. So it'll resolve in about 1 second. So that should work, and now that should clear all the errors here. And yep, no errors. So now we can use this promise and just take a look at how it normally works. So if we wanted to take a look at this promise, we just do my promise. And you can see we can either catch something or we can use then. So usually then is used when it gets resolved. So we'll have a val here, and we'll just console log the val. And you can see here it takes about a second, and then we have resolved. There it is. So it's working as we expect. But if we have, let's say this was rejected, error, and then we change this to a reject, and rejects about a second, you could see here we did see the error for a second, but that's because it was still resolving. But now you can see here we're not getting anything because we're not catching it at all. So the error's happening, is just silently failing. But we can use something called a .catch, and that will actually have my error in it. And then once again, I can just log that error. And just to make sure I show it right, I can do like this. You see error.error. So it's taking this promise and it's catching it. And that's simply how you do it with inside this promises. Now, I'm not going to get into this, but one of the things that are disadvantages with promises is that a lot of times you need to take the value that gets returned from the promise, and then you need to feed that in to another. It's a promise of itself that you can then need to send somewhere else. You a lot of times you get what's called a callback hell because you're having all these .thens cascading into each other, and it becomes quite hard to read. So here comes async await, which can help with some of that. So I'm going to go ahead and just comment. I'm going to leave our promise, so we're going to use that same. But I am going to comment out our example here and clear out what we have here. So the next thing we want to do is see if we can create a function and use something called async await, which I'll show you here. So let's say we want, we're going to test the promise, And then this time we're going to use something called the async keyword. And we're going to make sure we have something here. And we can do, I don't know, we can do var data, and now we await the promise that we just kept, that we just created. And in this case, we'll go ahead and console log the data. Now it's giving us an error because the promise that we have here is cannot find it. So let's make sure we have it. So we actually call it my promise. So I'll make sure I call my promise here. Okay, great. And you can see here it's not doing anything because it's rejecting. But if we change this to, I don't know, we say works, we can then change this to resolve. See if it takes a second. It's resolving. Make sure it awaits correctly. Oh, and of course we have to run it. So we'll just run it like this. Take a second. Cool. So we can see our normal works right here. So one thing we can do if we have an error, so we'll change it back to reject error, is we can take this data, which is in this block here, and we could surround it by a try catch, which sort of looks like this. And then we have a catch here with an error. And then what we do is we take our promise, we surround it inside the try block, and then inside the error block, which I can, by the way, I'm using var here, but that's fine. And then inside the catch block, I can console, I guess we can do console.error, error. And you can see here now we got the error back. See, that's this error right here, this reject. Hi.error. You see in console we got hi.error, so we know it's now catching it, which is perfect. Now the problem with the try catch block is it's a little verbose. I mean, you have to put this try catch block after every single time you do a wait. You're gonna have to try to catch it. So there is a better way to do it, and this definitely doesn't make it. This await, async await is really great looking, but when you start having to put in these try catch blocks, it becomes not so perfect. So one thing we can do, and I'll go ahead and go to our next example, is we can create something called a function or an error handler factory using what's called a high order function. So we can have the same example here. Actually, I'll copy this with our test promise and our await. And our closing, this time we'll just close it, but we won't use a try catch block, and I'll uncomment this. And we'll use our test promise here. And as you see, nothing showing up in our console log because we're not catching the error at all. But what we could do is create kind of this high order function that will basically this function factory, which basically we'll send it a function, it'll attach the .catch to it, and it'll return that function back to us. So let's take a look how that would work here. So the easiest way to do that is we'll create another function here. So we'll just call it HOF, high order function. We'll call it error handler. I don't know. We can call it wrapper. And we'll have a function. And I'll go ahead and switch this to ES6 in a second, but this might be easier to understand at first. We have a function that accepts a function, and it's going to return another function, which will, by the way, we can do these 3 dots and put in parameters or params or whatever you want. And this will make sure that we get all the parameters that are coming through. Parameters. And then this will return this will return basically the function that we want to return here. So it's going to return the fn, but this time we're going to do the .catch on it, and this time we'll the fn.catch will also have like function, which once again will return. Well, this time we won't even return anything. We'll just console log the error. So this is going to be err. So this is our error handler, just kind of verbose, just putting the functions in. So we have this error handler, accepts in a function as a parameter. It then returns a function that this dot parameters is everything that was passed into it. We're going to use the function here and add a catch to it, so basically returning that function with the dot catch, which is going to just log out the error. So let's see if that works. So our test promise didn't work, but if we now put it in the error handler, and now we run it like this. Oops, I gotta do this. Parameters. There it is. So now we have, I'll go ahead and run that again. So now we have this high error. So what it's doing is it's attaching this parameters, this function parameters. It's attaching the .catch and then returning it, so that way it works. However, if we change this back to resolve high working, and we reload it here, see right here we don't have anything happening if it fails, but we can put console, or if it doesn't fail, so we console log data here. So it's working. So this is working, but if we change this to a reject, hi, not working, and we put this to reject, you see hi, not working. So cool. Now this is pretty verbose right here. We're passing in, we're returning the function, catching it, but we can rewrite this in kind of an ES6 style. So instead of doing it this way, we can do const error handler, and from there we can pass in the function. We'll do arrow functions here, and that's going to pass in the parameters. We're going to return the parameters, which will then run here. Parameters, we're going to then add the .catch to it. We're going to do the error, and then we're going to console log the, I should probably console warn or error, but err error. And cool. So if we run it again, you can see here error high not working. So it's returning, it's rejecting it with the high not working, and we're adding the text err to the front of it. So that's it. That's how you could do it. You could also probably do custom error handling. You could pass in more values into your function that gets passed into the error handler, but for now we'll just leave this as is. So that's like a one-liner way of doing this custom error handler. So what you do is every time you have a function in your app that needs to be executed, you can wrap it in this error handler, and that way if there is any errors, that it gets sent somewhere. If you're, like, for example, on Node, you can then run it on Next, and you can then send it to your custom error handler in Node, or show up on the page or something. So that is one way to do it. And what I'll do, by the way, is all this code will be on StackBlitz. I'll put a link in the description below so you guys can test it out and play with it at the same time, see what I'm doing. All right, so now we're going and moving on to Rxjs. So Rxjs, just real briefly, if you're not familiar with it, it's a type of technology. It's really familiar with Angular developers because it's really built in to Angular 2+. And it's a way you can take, and you can, instead of using promises, everything is a stream. And you have all these Rxjs operators that you can use to do a lot of things. You can add delays, you can map things, you can switch map things, you can do a lot of really cool things. So I was just going to show you guys how you can use Rxjs to go ahead and create to catch an error in something. So the easiest way we can do that then to start off with is to take the promise that we have already and then convert it over to a observable so we can use it inside our inside what we're trying to do here. So to do that, I'm going to create a new observable. I'm going to use this from operator, and we're going to pass in the my promise. And you can see here at the top, I went ahead and imported in these imports of pipe from. So from is a way, and by the way, I have TypeScript on this as well, but I'm not going to use too much TypeScript until the end. So a from is a Rxjs operator that we can convert either arrays or promises to observables. So this now new observable can be observed, which is cool. So now if you look at the observable, we can then, you can see we have a subscribe. We can subscribe to it. And what will happen is it will return back the value. If it, for example, it just resolved without any problems, it would return a value through your subscribe. So we can see that looks like console log obs, and we'll just pass in the val. You see right now, I don't get it. It doesn't work. But once again, if I go back up here and just change this to resolve hi working, you see OBS hi working. So you see it's working right there. So we know that the subscribe is working. But we want to look at errors, so we'll put it back to reject, hi not working. And you see that's not showing up in the console because it's not working. We don't have any way to handle it. So what we can do with this observable is we can use the pipe operator, and with the pipe operator is a way we can pipe in operators into Rxjs. And the one you would want to use for this is called catchError. And the catchError is basically accepts an error here, and then it returns, for the catchError, it returns an observable. So there's this operator called OF that we can then return an operator. So we could say, I don't know, error, and then we can pass in this error here. Oh, so we have this catchError here. Inside the catchError, we'll have a val, which will then equal here. Well, actually, we'll do this. We just have it written wrong, so we'll do error here. There it is. Now it's giving us an error about the subscribe because scribe does not use this type operator function. So we'll have one more thing like this. So one more ending clause. So there we go. So we have OBS error, hi error not working. So if we do this, and it takes a second. So now we're catching the error. So the new observable, we do this catchError. We have error here. We're piping it to OF, which is right here. I subscribed in. Basically, it creates an observable from like a text string. And then we're just returning a string. And then that way, this will be shown soon as the error occurs. So it rejected, so we have this error. Now, there is a way. So that's how you do it with Rxjs, just a basic catchError. So what we can do here is instead of catching it, we'll go ahead and create a custom error handler, which is really easy. So to do that, to create the custom error handler, I'm going to call const. I'm going to call it custom error handler operator. Doesn't matter what I call it really. And from there, I'm going to send a message with it. I'll show you guys how that works. And then I'll have this catchError, which is that Rxjs operator. And once again, we'll have the error here. And we'll do the arrow functions. So this might look familiar, what we just wrote. We'll put in the message. And then we'll put in the val here. So Oops, I mean the ER. So what this is saying is that this custom error handler, we're gonna have a message that's passed into it. It's gonna send it to the catch error and it's gonna display it on the screen. So now if we go back, I'll go ahead and copy and paste this for the sake of time. And we still have the new observable. We're gonna have the new observable here, but instead of this piping the catch in, we're gonna pipe in this custom error handler operator, and then we're gonna pass in a value to it, which will be test123. And you can see down right here, it's working. I'll just go and refresh it. So now I piped in a message, OBS test123 hi, not working. So it's passing in this OBS here, and the test123 is getting concatenated with it. So it's, even though the custom error handler is failing, it still subscribes right here. So we still get the message even though it failed, because we have this error handler in here. So the way it works is we have this custom error handler, and then we have the pipe, and we're having our own custom error handler, and then it's still hitting the subscribe and then displaying it down here. So that's how it's working. All right, so we have one more that I'll show you. And that is how to use like a decorator. So we're gonna create this most simplest class here. I'm gonna do class, my class. And then inside there, I'm going to have a async function, which is going to be called myfunc. And that is going to const test, and that's going to await my promise that we created earlier. And then I'm going to console log test. And then underneath here, I'm going to const test class, which will be new my class, and then I'm going to run test class dot my function, which you can see right here, I don't have anything on the screen because it is failing. So what we can do is create something called a decorator. Now a decorator is like a structural design pattern that lets you attach new behaviors to objects by placing them inside wrapper objects. So we would do something like this. We would have that catch here, which this @ sign signifies when you're using TypeScript with classes that you're creating a decorator. And you can see here, decorators, you would have a target, a key, and a descriptor. So now we need to implement this @catch. So that way when in this instance, that actually something happens. So if we go all the way back up to the top, we have this catch, and I already created a directory or a file for it called decorator. So if I go to the decorator class, I kind of started it off, and we have this idea of a catch. We have a target, key, and descriptor. Target, it depends on where you're using the decorator. If you're using it on a method, these actual values are different than if you were, let's say, using it on something else, like a class or a property. So what we can do first is we'll create original method, which descriptor, basically we can grab the descriptor.value. So this is the original method. And then what we're going to do is we're going to override it with a different type of method. So we're going to do the descriptor.value. We're going to do an async function here. And we're going to use a function. And we're going to just grab the args from it. Function .args. And then inside here, we'll do our try catch block. And so first we're going to return, we're going to await, we're going to take the original method here, and we'll apply this and args. So what we're saying right now is that we're just going to return the exact same method if it doesn't have any problems. However, if there is an error, that's where this catch comes in handy. we're going to console log, we'll do error, it doesn't matter, an error, the actual error itself. And then right before here, we'll return it's the scriptor. So it's kind of, we call it a factory because it's actually returning back a function. So that should be it. We'll save it here. And then we'll just add a space here. So original method's not defined. Original. I got a typo here. Let's try that again. Cool. So you see hi not working. So it's taking the, it's doing the try catch, and it's sending back the error. So we go back here. I'll save it. Go back to index.html, index.ts. So now our class with this decorator is catching the errors. So that way we are good to go. And we can add this @catch to every single method inside any of the classes we want. And every time we have an error, it will then log to our error right here. And we can do all sorts of fun things. We can actually pass values in here if we wanted to. So we can have like custom error handlers if we really wanted to, but we're not gonna do that right now because it's a little beyond the scope. So there it is. That was 6 different examples of different ways you can do error handling in JavaScript. I know the last two, the Rxjs and the decorators, we went over quickly, but if you guys are interested, make sure to look at the StackBlitz. I'll make sure I put a link in the description so you guys can play around. That'll all be commented out, so just make sure you uncomment it. Make sure you uncomment the promise at the top, and then you can try each one of the examples and see how it all works. Really appreciate you guys watching. Leave a comment if you have any questions below. Thanks.